reproductive physiology, I think. That's probably an overstatement, but let me get away with it anyway. Okay, I'm going to start with the basic question that I think every organism is faced with. You know, what's it all about? What is life anyway? And I think life of all organisms is very simple. Energy in, more organisms out. That's what life is. Life is a process of capturing energy from the environment, converting it into other organisms. And those that are more successful at doing this tend to bias succeeding populations with more of their type. But right from the top, I think this illustrates that there's a profound connection between energy metabolism and reproduction. All the other stuff the organism does, you know, growing, fighting, blah, 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 it's just in the service of this conduit. This is the conduit that matters. Okay, now one way of thinking about that in even more abstract terms that's familiar to those who study life history theory was a paradigm that was originally proposed by Gadgil and Bossert over 40 years ago, which simply posits that organisms are faced at every moment in time with a decision about how to allocate scarce resources. And some of those allocations are between non-overlapping categories. And this is just simple Newtonian laws. I mean, the calorie that you spend growing is not available to spend on reproduction. You can't spend the same calorie twice. So that there are necessary trade-offs in the allocation of energy within the organism. Grand categories sometimes get referred to, such as growth, organism getting larger in whatever context, maintenance, all the things that an organism does to keep itself alive. Some excess energy might be stored or immobilized, and then reproduction. To a life history biologist, the energy that is directed towards reproduction, that portion of the total budget that is directed towards reproduction, gets referred to as reproductive effort. And what I'm going to talk about this morning are three aspects of the modulation of human reproductive effort, and see if we can see how that works. I lost the PowerPoints are doing funny things. The E got moved over. So we'll just cope. All right, this is your kilo great-grandmother, or 100-kilo great-grandmother, and I don't mean that she weighed 100 kilos, I mean that she's on the order of 100,000 generations ago. Homo habilis, pregnant mom, drawn by a wonderful artist, to anatomical appropriate scale. The arms are an appropriate ratio to the legs. You'll notice the fetus has, if you look closely, he has curved phalanges on the toes. This is your kilo great-grandmother. All of us are descended from her. So that's just so you know. She's going to be standing as an icon on the side of some of the slides. But what she represents is that our reproductive physiology has been under selection over these 100,000 generations or so, and even before. Now, the three topics I'm going to talk about, three ways in which energy allocation intersect with human reproduction, are one that came up yesterday. Gestation and fetal brain growth. Lots we could say about that. I'm only going to touch on a couple things. Facultative female fecundity and male reproductive effort. Okay, so those are the three topics we're going to look at. We'll start with gestation and fetal brain growth. Everyone in the room, I'm sure, is aware that humans are rather unusual for the size of our heads, for the size of the brain that we carry inside our heads. It's one of our distinctive characteristics. We're way off the scale. Most of our hominoid relatives are, in fact, quite encephalized. And in fact, the encephalization of the hominid line has been going on for a long, long time. And this has, but we're extreme, and this has a lot of implications. I think it was Chris who mentioned difficulty in labor as one consequence. Those are the simple things. what we're going to talk about is how difficult it is to grow a human brain and the challenges of growing a brain in the 9 months that a woman has available to her in gestation. That's not the end of brain growth, of course, and this was pointed out as well, I think, by Randy, that the human brain continues to grow for a considerable period after birth. It's not complete or anywhere near complete in its development at birth. And because of that, as already mentioned, we end up being very, very fat babies. Here's humans, here's the normal regression line for mammals. We're extremely fat, this is on a log scale, fatter relative to our body size than a harp seal. Those cute little babies that get, clubbed to death on it. So we're pretty fat. If anyone knows why guinea pigs are so fat, they can explain it to me. I don't understand that point, but we're extremely fat. But all of that fat at birth, not all of it, but one way to think of it is it's brain in reserve. It's brain that the baby puts on, energy that the baby accumulates in order to help support that rapid and continued brain growth after birth. Notice also that at full term, a baby's brain is the major thing that the mother is supporting. It's taking over 60% of the metabolic space that the baby occupies within the mother's body. It's just going to keep that brain alive, just to support it. So growing and supporting the fetal brain is a huge task. It's so huge that women shift from a period of being in an anabolic state early in pregnancy, where they're accumulating tissue, including their own tissue. In fact, they're accumulating fat at a higher rate than they are accumulating fetus or placenta early in pregnancy. But they need that because they're going to have to mobilize it late in pregnancy in order to support the energetic demands of that fetal brain growth. And a human pregnancy is really quite a physiological trick, as many of you know, because at the end, the woman is in a catabolic state at the same time that the fetus is in an anabolic state. And that's a trick. And the placenta, among its many other functions, serves as a barrier to actually isolate the fetus from the catabolic hormones like cortisol that are controlling this mobilization of fat in the mother. And that has lots of interesting implications that we won't have time for in this talk, but we can go into later. Okay, so brains. Humans have really big brains. This has been going on at an accelerating pace for a long time, particularly lately in our evolutionary history. But as I said, even before that. And if we look at the mechanisms that support human pregnancy, we can see the trace of selection on energy delivery during pregnancy going back quite a ways. Here's our family tree, the primates. And I've noted in places, if you go back even further, the hemochorial placenta, which I'll remind you of what that is in a second, probably is ancestral to all of this. But early in the primate lineage, epitheliochorial placentas dominate. Hemochorial placentas re-emerge with the old world primates. By the time we get to the hominoids, the apes, interstitial implantation develops. And then by the time we get to humans, extremely deep placentation develops. What are these things? Well, and go even further, there are other adaptations. Fetal hemoglobin genes, positive selection on the metalloproteases that support invasive implantation. The chorionic gonadotropin genes duplicate. Positive selection on placental genes, again, all increasing. So there's the physiology of human pregnancy has been under continuous selection for long in our history, and increasing selection as we get to the hominoids, the hominids, and modern humans. Just to remind you, hemochorial placentas, are placentas in which maternal tissue just bathes in fetal tissue just bathes, the villus bathes in a lake of maternal blood like a hand in a bowl of broth. It's one of the mechanisms that increases the surface area for nutrient exchange, thus increases the potential for pushing energy across from the maternal circulation to the fetal circulation. It has costs. There are no pipes in these cisterns, so you need to maintain relatively high blood pressure within the placenta in order to keep the blood flowing and keep it from stagnating in these lacunae. You need to keep your maternal glucose levels pretty high in order to keep driving the exchange, because there's no countercurrent mechanism to maintain efficiency of that glucose exchange within the human placenta. But it increases surface area, so it increases that possibility. Interstitial implantation, the burying of the embryo, the early embryo, completely within the wall of the endometrium, is a precursor to this kind of extremely invasive, extremely efficient placentation. And the extremely deep placentation involves the invasion of the openings of the spiral arteries by cells of fetal cells of the placenta that open up those spiral arteries to maximize the flow of blood into the lacunae. So all of this is in the service of increasing the rate at which energy can be transferred from mother to fetus. Again, just showing you as this happens, less blood flow with a closed spiral artery. The more you can open that spiral artery up, the more blood flow you can get. To the extent that you fail to do that, you set yourself up for preeclampsia, for the kinds of hypertensive disorders that can accompany human pregnancy because of the inability to maintain sufficient perfusion of the placenta by maternal blood. But all of this means that the human placenta is remarkably adept at pushing energy across to the fetus. The maximal placental glucose flux of a human is 40 times that's achievable by a sheep. Why? Why would we need such a high ceiling on energy transfer? We need it to support that fetal brain at the end. That's when the demands of fetal metabolism start really skyrocketing. So here's a problem that continues to beset human obstetrics, but one that's interesting. What actually triggers human parturition, or what are the mechanisms that lead to that? And one way of thinking about them is in relation to this fetal demand for energy. And I'm going to put aside some of the thoughts that I might go into related to other theories. I'm going to concentrate on this one. So, but first I have to set it up. What triggers human parturition? When you ask Harvard undergraduates, you get some wrong answers. I'm sure that the physicians and educated members of this audience never fall into these traps. But a lot of people would say, oh, there's just a 9-month clock. I mean, human pregnancy is 9 months long. You go that long, and the alarm goes off. I mean, you can't have a pregnancy just continue indefinitely, can you? What is the record for the longest viable human gestation? Does anyone have a relative that's gone 42 weeks? 44 weeks? 48 weeks? Any takers? 52 weeks? 54 weeks. And you don't have to believe me, you can look it up, okay? But the interesting thing is that the product of this pregnancy, what's this? An anencephalic fetus. This is a fetus born without the development of the neocortex, without the energetic demand that neocortex would generate. And as a result, never pulls the trigger, because it's really the fetus that pulls the trigger, to initiate human reproduction. But there's nothing about the placenta that wears out at 9 months. The placenta can keep going, the mother can keep going more or less indefinitely. So there's nothing limiting about human placental function. The other wrong answer you get often is that, well, there's a developmental threshold. You know, when the fetus is done, it pulls the trigger, and it's just a matter of getting to that developmental threshold. And that fits a lot of organisms. It certainly fits sheep pretty well, who need to be able to stand up almost as soon as they are born, need to be able to follow their mothers and their herds if they're going to survive. So a sheep needs to be pretty well done before it's born. If it gets born before that point, it's not going to survive. So you can imagine the sheep inside there, you know, waiting for the last rivet to be placed and the last wire to be hooked up, and then it pulls the chain and out it comes. That model does not fit humans. One way to see that is to realize that, in fact, undernourished mothers, this graph doesn't quite represent it, but it gives you the idea. Undernourished mothers have small fetuses, and those fetuses get born early. They have shorter gestation times. Overnourished mothers, diabetic mothers, have large fetuses, and those get born late. But it's really the undernourished mothers that are the key. I mean, if the point was getting the baby done, why would an undernourished mother have her baby early? Why wouldn't she just keep it in the oven a little longer until it was done? Right? So it's clearly, it's not developmental completion that leads to the pulling of the trigger. Most of the modern research on the mechanism suggests that it really is the fetal brain development. Now, why don't you stay in the cooker longer? Well, if you stay in the cooker longer, you actually start losing fat as a fetus. If the baby stays in too long, one of the aspects of post-maturity, of course, is fetal wasting. The baby ends up having to mobilize its own fat tissues to support the increasing demands of its brain. So if there's something pathological, like maternal diabetes, that prolongs this pregnancy, it's to the detriment of that fetus. So what actually goes on? Well, you all probably know this, but just to remind you, it starts with signals from the fetal adrenal. When the fetus actually enters that state of energy crisis and begins to secrete cortisol in increasing amounts, because it now needs to mobilize its own fat reserves. Its mother has reached her limit of her ability to push energy across the placenta. Then that signal leads to parturition. It certainly prepares the lung, as we know, for birth by stimulating surfactant production and other things. But the cortisol also goes to the placenta, where it stimulates the production of prostaglandins that are the real engines of the early onset of parturition, and where it also stimulates the production of placental corticotropin-releasing hormone, which, instead of having a negative feedback effect on the fetus's HPA axis, has a positive stimulating effect there. So you get a positive feedback loop whereby fetal cortisol leads to more CRH, leads to more fetal cortisol, and the whole thing escalates, driving the pregnancy on. And what really starts this all is fetal energy demand outstripping the maternal ability to keep up with it. And that's why guys like that never reach that point. It's also why undernourished mothers reach that point before overnourished mothers, and why overnourished mothers go further before they reach that point. We have a paper coming out in PNAS soon that is going to extend this to mammals generally. But you can think of conditions that are related to this deep connection between energy transfer in pregnancy, the need to maximize energy transfer, and the danger that that puts a human mother in. It pushes her close to the thresholds of preeclampsia, right? So it sets her up for preeclampsia. If that deep invasive placentation doesn't go as planned or as efficiently as it should, She's going to be set up for preeclampsia. Sets her up for gestational diabetes. She's having to keep her glucose levels very high to support that pregnancy. The fetus is helping by pumping out placental lactogen to try and keep those glucose levels high. And if she's teetering on the edge of gestational diabetes and can be pushed over. Some of you were interested in preterm birth. You probably meant really preterm birth. But in this range of normal variation in human gestation length, a lot of that probably can be explained by the balancing dynamics of fetal demand and maternal supply. Okay, let's push on. Second topic. Yes, go.
So, could you say a little bit about how twins fit into this?
How would you think twins fit into it?
Born a little bit earlier, they got 2 brains instead of 1.
They're born considerably earlier. And triplets are born earlier still. Mothers who smoke have preterm birth. Anything that limits the delivery of glucose or oxygen to the fetus, that either limits maternal supply, right? So being undernourished, being a smoker, being at high altitude, any of those things, or that increases fetal demand, having a twin or a triplet, will push the crossover point earlier. Anything that does the opposite will push it later. Not having a neocortex, having a diabetic mother with out of control glucose levels, anything like that will push it later. Other questions? Yes?
Are there data showing that populations living at higher altitudes have babies earlier? Or do they have
They do. Well studied. There are mechanisms, of course, I should say, high altitude populations have special mechanisms. They have those who are long-term, Tibetans and Andeans, have evolved mechanisms, not only general mechanisms for surviving at high altitude, but special mechanisms for being pregnant at high altitude.
What are those mechanisms?
Sorry?
What are those mechanisms?
Some of them involve, Lorna Moore has shown a lot of them, so has, Cynthia Beale has done more of the general adaptation. Lorna Moore is a name to look at for the special adaptations of pregnancy. A lot of them involve the architecture of the blood supply to the uterus versus the leg, which it favors the uterus more heavily in high altitude populations, so they're anatomical adaptations, and there are others. But if you, or if any of us who are not used to it, went up and lived in Leadville, Colorado, you would have a small baby and you would have it early. Okay, well, let's push on. Facultative female fecundity. By this, I simply mean to point out what I said yesterday, that you might think that if natural selection just worked to optimize human physiology, it would make female reproduction the most imperturbable, rock-solid, canalized, defended, buffered aspect of human physiology. I mean, that is reproductive success right there. So why would you ever want to allow that to be derailed? And yet, we know there's a lot of variation. Talk to the women who are trying to get pregnant and having trouble. So what's going on? Well, this leads us back to this diagram. And now at this point, we're going to talk about adult women. So when we talk about adult women, allocation to growth is not an issue. Now, because of the good work of my former colleague, Rose Frisch, a lot of people have been taught to think about stored energy as a crucial factor in the modulation of adult female reproductive effort. But my group, and men, I think it's fair to say now that the majority of those in the field actually think it has much more to do with energy balance, with energy availability due to variance in the supply and variance in the demand. But so if you work too hard, if you don't eat enough, those are the things that can lead to diminished energy available for reproduction. This is, in fact, just another barometer of energy balance, all right? I mean, this has a plus and a minus to it, too. So the degree to which you are in positive energy balance, this reserve can go up. The degree in which you are in negative energy balance, this reserve goes down. So it's just another reflection of this dynamic. But as I say, the first person really to bring this perspective into medicine, I think, was Rose Frisch, who posited that stored energy was an important modulator of female reproductive potential. And probably one of the first places it really made its mark was in exercise physiology and the recognition that the oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea of female athletes was not necessarily pathological. That this is what the female's body is supposed to do. It's what evolution has designed it to do when energy is in short supply, to downregulate reproductive effort, because there's just not enough, this isn't the right time to try to reproduce. And if we treat it, if we corrected that, if we caused such women to have high fecundity, the high potential for getting pregnant, we could do them actually significant harm, not good. But we've gotten more sophisticated, and this question is one that's driven my own research for 25 years. This is a picture that Gillian knows well of folks in the Ituri forest in what is now the Congo in the terribly war-ravaged region, but this was in happier days. There's a woman looking, in fact, not at her baby. She's holding the baby, so the woman in the back can pucker her lips and spit into a test tube. And 25 years ago, we started measuring ovarian hormones in saliva, something that in those days, every medical conference I went to, they told me, oh, this is stupid, you can't do this, why are you bothering with this? This is nuts, and now you can buy kits off the shelf that are specially designed to measure steroid hormones in saliva. A woman in Nepal doing the same thing. From these saliva samples, we're actually able to characterize human ovarian function in the field in much finer detail than most physicians have available, who may have one blood sample. We can actually look at the entire menstrual profile. Not one profile. We can look at serial months. We can follow a woman for a long period of time. And when we do, we find interesting things. We find, for example, that when a woman's follicular estradiol is high, right, an individual woman, her profiles will go up and down month to month. If we follow the same women for a year, we find she's much more likely to conceive if her follicular estradiol levels are high than if her follicular estradiol levels are low. So her own fecundity is going up and down. And one of the things that changes this is energy balance. And it doesn't need to be marathon running. These are women who are running just around the Charles River just for exercise. They're not in training, doing 20 miles a week maybe. But notice their estradiol profiles, how much lower than the sedentary women they are, even lower than the women in the previous slide who are not conceiving. And these are women who may even still be menstruating. There may be no visible sign of this suppression of fecundity. The nice thing is it's completely reversible. They stop this exercise, they can pop right back up. Energy, that was exercise. Energy balance. In Norway, we found the same sort of thing. Women who lose 2% of their body weight across a study have lower profiles than those who gain 2% of their body weight. These are women in places like Norway and Boston who are either dieting or running around in circles, things that are actually pretty strange human behaviors. In most of the places that I work, people can't really understand the attraction of starving yourself voluntarily or running around in circles because you think that's good for you. I mean, these are actually not the modulators of energy balance that humans have been subjected to. These are sort of strange idiosyncratic things that Westerners do. But humans, in almost every environment we look at, are subject to varying amounts of energy demand and supply. So variance in energy balance is the norm around the world. And when that happens, as in this woman in the Congo, when average weight goes down because food runs out before the harvest, ovulatory frequency also goes down. When energy balance goes positive after the harvest, ovulatory frequency comes back up. This phenomenon, this tracking, the ability of female fecundity to track energy balance has been seen in almost every population we've looked at. In a place like the Congo, where these ebbs and flows of food happen relatively predictably, there's a hunger season that happens almost every year, and at the same time every year, and a harvest that happens almost. It ends up producing such fluctuations of fecundity in the population that if we look at the conception rate against the calendar, we see nice seasonality, a nice variation in conception at the population level, tracking that energy availability. Now, caveat, a lot of people when I show this, they think, oh, well, that's like a bird. You're trying to time the birth for the harvest. This has nothing to do with timing the birth. And there is no particular heavy demand for energy just around birth or in the few first months. Human energy demand extends much beyond this. This is about timing the conception for a period in which the woman is in positive energy balance, able to do all that anabolic fat storage early in pregnancy that she's going to need to do in order to maintain the pregnancy later. We see this all over the place. Here's the general region of Senegal and Gambia, where I'm working now, that has, again, very pronounced seasonality in energy availability. So women cycle in weight annually, and as a result, they cycle in conceptions. These are the 95% confidence intervals over 20 years of data. They track that energy availability very closely. Women in Bangladesh, who have the same kinds of seasonal variation, also track that. And we're quite confident now that this is female fecundity, not reproductive behavior. This isn't coital frequency. This isn't people being too tired. This is the woman's fecundity. Yes?
Do you have any explanation for the fall of the second child?
No. No special one. My own guess is that you're going to get some things that are going to be simply demographic. You know, as everybody gets pregnant, there aren't as many people left to get pregnant. You know, so there are going to be some blips that will have to do with the actual demographic structure of the population and how large you're looking. The Bangladeshi population and timed up the data is much, much larger. The population is like 10 times larger than the one in Senegambia, and the duration of the data is much higher, and you don't get those little wiggles. So I think it's just, it might be that, but no, I don't have any special explanation for that. So what's going on? Yes?
Sorry, does it change something, like those women, for instance, they seem to have an energy supply for a short period of time. So you'd imagine that they build up, they eat as much as they can, and then they use up those resources to feed the growing baby, while we have access, like in populations like ours, we have access to resources constantly. So is there a difference between using stored resources for this period of fetal growth where the fetus needs so much resources versus using supplies that we have provided on a constant basis?
My guess is, it's a good question. You know, are we really sensitive to the positive energy balance, or is it to the stored energy? My guess is that it's actually a balance, partly because I don't think we've had that much stored energy available in our evolutionary past. You know, energy supply has been limiting, not enough to support. Women don't sort of get fat and then squeeze out babies and get skinny, you know, like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. What they get fatter during pregnancy, even women who are malnourished. In the Gambia, where people are often malnourished, the women, when they do get pregnant, downregulate their own basal metabolism in order to free up energy to store for the baby. So I think it's much more like the question of, you know, you go to the bank and you'd like to build a house, you know, and so you're going to the bank, and what the bank wants to know is, they're interested in your bank account, how much you've actually got saved. But what they really want to know is your income and your expenses, and whether you're going to be able to amortize that expense over a period of time. And I really think that what humans are trying to track, is that ability to be in and sustain a period of positive energy balance. Now, you never have perfect prediction of the future. Just because you're in good condition this month, next month could be a disaster. You don't know. But the present is the best predictor, and we do have evidence that the longer that good times last, the more positive effect it has on female fecundity. So if you get 2 or 3 months in a row of either weight loss or weight gain, then you accentuate the shifts in fecundity. There's more to be said, but let me push on, and I'll be glad to talk more. You look like I've totally missed your question entirely.
No, not entirely, but I'm not yet satisfied.
You're not satisfied. That's good. That's good. Don't be satisfied. So what's going on? Why do women in positive energy balance? What mechanistically is controlling this? One mechanism is a direct link between energy metabolism and ovarian function. And we now know, I always shoot myself because I did a postdoc in the laboratory of Ken Ryan way back when, and we were studying granulosa cell development and the steroid pathways and how all that happened. And I remember that we always had to put insulin into our culture media in order to get the follicles to grow. I mean, they wouldn't grow without insulin. Now we refer to insulin as a co-gonadotropin. It has very strong stimulating effects. So that these are in vitro experiments, but estradiol production from cultured granulosa cells, control, give them FSH, you get more. Give them insulin, you get more estradiol out of those cells with insulin than you do with FSH. You give them both, and you get a whopping amount. Same thing with progesterone. So insulin, the more insulin you produce, the more that stimulates ovarian function to a higher level. And I think that's one of the mechanisms that is keeping ovarian function in lockstep with energy availability. We should have known this. The dairy folks know it very well. In a cow that's coming back out of pregnancy and lactation, you want to get that cow pregnant again so that you can milk her again. A very important part of stimulating the maturation of that cell is the increase in insulin that's necessary to get the estradiol pumping out of that follicle to actually get ovulation to occur. In Argentina, we see virtually the same thing going on in humans. This is C-peptide of insulin, portion that's cleaved off the proinsulin molecule that exists in 1-to-1 molar ratio with insulin production in the urine. These are women who are lactating, aligned on the month in which they resume menstruation. And notice that just before they resume menstruation, their C-peptide levels are going high. They're entering a transient period of high insulin production that helps jumpstart that follicular maturation of the ovary and get cycling going again. It tracks, here's C-peptide in red, tracking BMI. So as the woman goes into positive energy balance, her C-peptide goes up. As her C-peptide goes up, her estrogen levels go up. So that linkage is extremely tight. So what are the medical consequences, or some of the medical consequences of this linkage? Certainly it helps us understand things like the female athletic triad, why high energy demand can lead to low estradiol production, interruption of menstrual regularity, bone loss, despite all that high stress impact activity. I put a paper in your folder written by one of your colleagues, Steve Corbett, suggesting how polycystic ovarian syndrome might be understood in relation to this paradigm. That, if you think about it, women who are able to continue to reproduce even under energetically stressed conditions, who are able to maintain sufficient reproductive effort in a low energy availability environment, probably might have been favored in the past. What is the phenotype of those women in the present? If part of what they relied on was higher insulin secretion to keep their ovaries pumping out for a given glucose availability. Now, when their glucose levels are very high, they may have excessively high insulin, which may drive them into a condition like polycystic ovarian syndrome. And as we'll see later in the week, reproductive cancer risk can be, and its modulation might be related to this. And also a lot of unanticipated public health consequences of public health interventions. I just want to touch on a couple of these. First, the cancer risk. Sometimes I pat myself on the back for having put in print almost 20 years ago the prediction. Evolutionary medicine ought to be able to make some prediction. I'm predicting that if things continue the way they were, we should see the epidemic of breast cancer that was then raging in North America and Europe spreading to the rest of the world. 20 years before that headline hit the cover of Time magazine. One part of that process may be the fact that as populations, at the whole population level, become more and more chronically characterized by positive energy balance, their ovarian hormone levels rise chronically. So the average hormonal levels of women in Boston are much higher than the average hormonal levels of women in Nepal. But these average ovarian hormonal levels plot very nicely on breast cancer incidence. And the prediction would be as these profiles come up, so will their breast cancer incidence. We can go into that maybe later. Public health interventions. There were a number of studies around the world back in the 70s aimed at trying to raise birth weights of babies by feeding the mothers. It seemed very obvious. You feed the mother, you're going to get a bigger baby. It didn't work. In Gambia, they increased maternal intakes by almost 40%, and they got on average a 50-gram increase in the fetus. Where did all that energy go? It went into the mother. As I said, these mothers were down-regulating their own metabolic rate in order to maintain the pregnancy. You give them the energy back, they don't have to cut those corners. They don't have to cut those corners. They reach positive energy balance postpartum sooner. So they fed the mothers to make bigger babies. They didn't make bigger babies. They made more babies. The women had shorter birth intervals and had more babies than they would have not being supplemented. In Ethiopia, an interesting, more recent attempt was made to drill wells so that women wouldn't have to walk 10 miles a day to carry water. You do that, you think, oh, okay, this will increase, you get them clean water, it'll lower infant mortality, it'll be good for the mothers, good for the babies. Certainly lowered maternal energy demand. It didn't actually lead to lower infant mortality. Infant nutritional status actually worsened. Why? Because the mothers had more babies. Similarly, you lower their work effort, you bring them back to reproductive conditions sooner postpartum, and you shorten the birth intervals. So being aware of these connections between energy balance and reproduction could inform people trying to make public health interventions about the kinds of effects that they might generate. Questions before I touch on the men briefly? Yes?
I want to clarify, are you suggesting that cancer risks are associated with not giving birth, or
Cancer risks are complicated. Let me try and make it simple. Or there's two ways to make it simple. Who is it? Malcolm Pike once said, "Oh, I can tell you what causes breast cancer. Money causes breast cancer." And he's right. I mean, if you actually look at median incomes and breast cancer incidence by community, by ethnicity, by population, maps right on. But I'll give you another rule of thumb. Ovarian hormones. Exposure, lifetime exposure to ovarian hormones raises cancer risk. Anything that increases your lifetime exposure, having menarche earlier, having menopause later, being in positive energy balance for more of the time, not breastfeeding your babies or breastfeeding your babies for shorter periods, having fewer babies. It's even short-term risks. The chance of breast cancer recurrence increase after pregnancy because of the steroid exposure of pregnancy. So anything that increases steroid risk, including these chronic elevations due to lifestyle changes, increasing intake, decreasing expenditure, shifting towards the positive energy balance that plagues us. As the rest of the world follows that trend, everything else will follow. Right? I told you yesterday, we're not typical. We're way off on the extreme of the norm of reaction in almost every respect of human physiology. We grow up faster, we grow up sooner, Pache, Julian, we get taller, and we run our gonads like there was no tomorrow. We're pumping out these hormones as if we were trying to get pregnant, like Emma Darwin. Now we frustrate that, both by using contraception and by using it for so long and trying to get pregnant later, and that has all kinds of consequences. But the energy flow to reproductive effort, we're trying to devote energy to reproductive effort in a way that we're just not letting come to fruition. So let me talk about men, because they're not immune to this. Male reproductive effort. Okay, guys, this is the only thing we're going to hit on you. So men, where do men fit in this? Well, reproductive effort often is subdivided into mating effort and parenting effort. And often it is portrayed, someone talked about differences between the sexes and so on. Often it's portrayed that females specialize in parenting effort. By that we mean putting energy directly into the offspring. Whereas males specialize in mating effort, which is not putting the energy into the offspring, but putting the energy into gaining opportunities to mate. Right? And that actually fits most male mammals quite well. It fits humans, and one of the hormones primarily responsible for modulating this in men is testosterone. I think of testosterone as the male reproductive effort hormone. And it controls mating effort in a number of ways. It actually controls directly spermatogenesis, controls competitiveness, aggression, all that kind of stuff, or at least helps to modulate those. Helps to modulate libido. I could say something about aging men, but I'm not going to go there. Okay, and but also it modulates, of course, lean body mass and muscle mass, as anyone who follows Major League Baseball in the United States now knows for sure. And this is something that I think we underestimate. This is probably the major way in which males modulate mating effort, is by modulating muscle mass. Think about it. Here's the way in which a male partitions metabolic energy. An adult male, most of the energy, a large part of it is going to the brain, a large part is going to the liver, kidney, and heart, these vital organs. Now suppose you are in a famine and you don't have enough energy to go along with, and you've got to cut down on your expenses somewhere. What are you going to cut back on? Are you going to shrink your heart or have it beat less fast? Probably there's not a lot you can save there. Are you going to shut down your kidney or your liver? Are you going to shrink your brain? Some people think that's what men do. But probably what you do, this is your flexible energy allocation. So men, under conditions of reduced energy supply, they don't actually shut down spermatogenesis. That's cheap. So they don't do the same thing that females do. They do lower their testosterone, but not to drop gamete production. One of the things it does over the long haul, though, is shrink energy allocation to lean body mass, particularly to skeletal muscle. I say you don't shrink your brain. Just to keep it in perspective, guys, this is your mega great-grandfather's brain and testicle. This is the chimpanzee brain and testicle, just to give you the sort of a perspective on, how important reproductive effort versus brain might be, okay? So, but in fact, mating effort isn't the only thing that human males do. It's not the only thing that all males do. Parenting effort is an important part of reproductive strategies of males, particularly males that are monogamous, either serially or for a lifetime. So seabirds, like the boobies that you have around here, are lifetime monogamous organisms. Even the robins in your backyard pair up for a breeding season, and males have a very important role in feeding either the female or the offspring. And there's elegant work done by Wingfield and others showing that they actually drop their testosterone levels when they are in parenting mode and raise their testosterone levels when they are in mating mode. When they're setting up territory, their testosterone levels are high. When they're helping to sit on the nest and feed the babies, their testosterone levels drop because they have to downregulate all that mating effort, including the behavioral side, in order to make room for mating side. Now, mammals, some mammals do this too, particularly those mammals that are monogamous or nearly so, including some rodents and quite a number, of primates. And there are a number of mechanisms involved, elevating prolactin in males, elevating oxytocin in males. These end up being more specialized. There are a few examples of them. They're not as widespread. The one that is really widespread is suppressing testosterone, that most primates do, including humans. Now, humans are, in fact, a species in which male parental care is actually quite common for a mammal. Men hang around. We do tend to stay in proximity to our wives. We do spend time taking care of our offspring. I had ambitious graduate students who said, well, gee, if that were true, would we see a relationship between testosterone suppression, mating, and parenting? And lo and behold, they studied, of course, other graduate students and junior faculty at Harvard and found that those that were unmarried had higher average testosterone levels than those that were married, and those that were married with children had the lowest levels, just like the monkeys or the birds in the backyard. The Harvard Gazette went a bit nuts with this when it came out, and came out with this title, "Marriage Lowers Testosterone," which of course is wrong, right? Or at least we couldn't prove that, right? All we've got is a correlation. And it could be just the other way around, right? It could be that low testosterone males are the wimpy ones, and they get married, and the high testosterone males are the the macho ones, and they don't get married. They play the field, right? So causation could run that way perfectly. And I pointed this out to my graduate students. They said, you're right. What are we going to do? Well, we're anthropologists. What we need is a tribe where men are men, and where it really, we don't run into those kinds of defaults. So where can we find such a tribe? And they found one. It was across the Charles River at Harvard Business School. They went across the business school, and they replicated the finding. And so now we're done. And I said, well, I don't know. It's a bit fun. But we've gone to a number of populations, and it is a difficult one. And we followed men longitudinally, across these transitions, being married, having children. Is it the time you actually spend with you? You can show that when men actually, their testosterone goes down during the day that they spend time with their offspring. But one nice study, the last one I'll show you, is compared two populations in East Africa that form a nice contrast, better than Harvard Business School. The Hadza, who are a hunter-gatherer foraging population in Tanzania, and the Datot, who are classical East African pastoralists, like the Nuer or the Maasai, living in Kenya. Yes, Kenya. But they're actually quite different. The Hadza are ideal fathers. They spend a lot of time with their offspring, a lot of time by human standards. They're holding their offspring for 5% of the day. They're actually interacting directly with their offspring for 15% of the day, which is actually quite high compared to other foraging populations. The record holders are Aka pygmies, although this needs to be replicated. But anyway, they're good fathers. They sleep with their wives and with their children, so forth, as opposed to the datot, who are warriors, and where the men, in fact, spend most of their day away from their families, where they take their meals in a separate men's hut, where they sleep in a separate men's hut. They're not, and where they're polygynous. So they have more than one wife, and they're arguably always allocating energy to mating effort. They're never sort of out of the marriage market, as it were. Well, now if you look at the testosterone levels in the Hadza ideal fathers, when they have kids, they drop their testosterone levels, just like a good monogamous male should. The datot do not. They don't interact with the kids. So this is a facultative response to the kind of parental interaction that a male may have. The average levels are the same between the two populations. It's just that modulation in relationship to fatherhood that is different. Does this have any health consequences? Here I can only speculate. Makes me think about age-related changes in body composition in males and age-related changes in testosterone and the degree to which that is sculpted by age-related changes in reproductive effort. There's even some data showing that when men get divorced, their lean body mass goes up, and when they get married, their lean body mass goes down, and that's independent of their eating behavior or going to the gym. This may well be modulated just by their testosterone levels. There may be some implications for cancer risk. I would love to see data on sort of prostate cancer incidence in fathers and non-fathers. There may be some relationship to things like syndromes of physical abuse of infants or spouses, to the degree to which males fail to do the kind of testosterone modulation that perhaps evolution tried to design them to do. So those are just some things to think about. But the real take-home lesson, end of talk, is this one. Energy and reproduction are intimately related. They cannot be separated. Reproduction is all about energy allocation, and many of the pathologies that beset human reproduction can be directly tied to the mechanisms that are linking reproduction and energy balance and the rather extreme environments that we live in today. Okay, I've run 5 minutes over time. We are going to have some time for questions at the end of the whole session, but if there are any burning questions that people want to raise right now, I'll take time. Yes?
Still thinking about the variation in fecundity and
Yes.
population. How should we think about connecting that to the population phenomenon of birth rate?
Yeah, so people often ask this. They say, but aren't the undernourished populations the ones that have the high birth rates? Is that your question? Yeah. What's the answer?
Well, the population size.
Sorry?
I assume the population size and the social structure.
How about contraception? We're talking about fecundity here, right? Ovarian function, not fertility. And a biologist is usually careful to distinguish fecundity, the biological capacity for having offspring, from fertility, the actual fact of it. When I lecture my undergraduates, I tell them, arguably, I hope, there may be a few exceptions, but most of you in this classroom are infertile at the moment. I'm the only fertile one in this classroom, but I'll bet your fecundity is a lot higher than mine. Your potential, your biological engine is running at a much higher level than mine is. We don't know if we had unconstrained intercourse and no contraception. Well, we have some populations like that. The Hutterites are a famous example, who have perhaps the highest population fertility rates in the world. I study one population, the Toba in Argentina, who were hunter-gatherers a couple generations ago, but now are living sort of on reservations. They, as a result, have very low energy expenditure, quite high intakes. They're quite hefty people. They have nice big babies. Age at first birth has dropped in 2 generations from 20 to 15. That's average age at first birth, right? And the average number of offspring for those women is 8. So I have every reason to believe that if we let our fecundity rip, we would probably have more children than the folks in Bangladesh do, who in fact only have about 5. Does that answer your question? Yes.